I flew 2,000 miles to see my daughter for her birthday, only to be told I'd be sleeping on the couch because her boyfriend needed the guest room for his gaming setup. What she didn't know was that I owned the entire building she was living in. And I was about to teach her a lesson about respect she'd never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The flight from Phoenix to Seattle felt longer than usual. Maybe because I was so excited to surprise my daughter Rebecca for her 26th birthday. I'd been planning this trip for months, carefully coordinating with her schedule, booking the expensive last-minute tickets, and even packing that ridiculous purple scarf she'd been wanting from the boutique downtown. As the plane descended through the familiar gray clouds that always seemed to hover over the Pacific Northwest, I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite name at the time but would later recognize as the last moments of my willful ignorance. I'm Arlene Crawford, and at 58, I thought I'd learned most of life's hardest lessons. 23 years in real estate had taught me to read people, to spot red flags, and to protect my investments. But somehow, when it came to my own daughter, I'd been wearing blinders so thick I might as well have been walking through life with my eyes closed. Rebecca was my only child, born after years of trying and 3 miscarriages that nearly broke my marriage. When David and I finally divorced 12 years ago, she was the one thing we both agreed we'd gotten right, even if we'd gotten everything else spectacularly wrong. After the divorce, I threw myself into building my real estate portfolio with the kind of determination that only comes from having nothing left to lose. While David moved to Florida with his secretary-turned-second wife, I stayed in Phoenix and started buying properties. Small ones at first, then bigger ones, then entire apartment complexes. I was good at it, better than I'd ever imagined I could be. Numbers didn't lie to you the way people did. Properties didn't suddenly decide they didn't love you anymore after 18 years of marriage. Buildings were honest about their problems, and when you fixed them, they stayed fixed. Rebecca had always been proud of my success, or so I thought. She'd brag to her friends about her mom, the real estate mogul, show off the designer handbags I'd send her, post pictures of the vacation trips I'd pay for. When she moved to Seattle 3 years ago for her job at a marketing firm, I'd been supportive, even excited. She was finally independent, making her own way in the world, and I'd done my job as a mother by giving her the confidence to spread her wings. What I didn't know was that I'd also been paying for those wings in ways I'd never agreed to. When I pulled up to her apartment building in my rental car, I felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. The Meridian Apartments on Capitol Hill was one of my newer acquisitions, a beautiful 1920s building I'd purchased and renovated 2 years ago. The original hardwood floors, the crown molding, the updated kitchens with granite countertops, it was exactly the kind of place a young professional should want to live. Rebecca had found it on her own, sent me pictures of her application, and I'd been so proud that she'd chosen something in her budget range, something reasonable and well-maintained. I'd approved her application under my property manager's name. Of course. I didn't want her to feel awkward about living in one of my buildings, didn't want her to think I was keeping tabs on her or trying to control her life. It was just a happy coincidence, I told myself, that she'd chosen one of my properties. Seattle was expensive, and I owned several buildings in the area. The odds weren't that astronomical. The building looked perfect, the way it always did when I drove by during my quarterly property inspections. The landscaping was immaculate, the exterior freshly painted, the windows gleaming. I'd put nearly $200,000 into renovations, and it showed. This was the kind of place where young professionals could build their lives, where they could invite their mothers to visit and feel proud of what they'd accomplished. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk and walked up the familiar stone steps to the front entrance, punching in the code that would let me into the lobby. The marble floors echoed under my heels, and I couldn't help but smile at the fresh flowers in the vase by the mailboxes. My property manager, Janet, really was worth every penny I paid her. Rebecca's apartment was on the 3rd floor, 3B, and I took the elevator up, my stomach fluttering with excitement. I'd texted her from the airport, letting her know I'd landed safely, but I hadn't told her exactly when I'd arrive. I wanted to surprise her, to see that look of pure joy on her face when she opened the door and found me standing there with her birthday present. When she opened the door, though, the look on her face wasn't joy. It wasn't even surprise. It was something closer to annoyance, mixed with what looked like panic, and my heart sank a little even as I tried to keep smiling. "Mom," she said, not moving from the doorway, not inviting me in. "What are you doing here?" "Surprise," I said, holding up the gift bag with the purple scarf. "Happy early birthday, sweetheart. I told you I was coming to visit." "I thought you meant next weekend," she said, glancing over her shoulder into the apartment. This is kind of a bad time." That's when I heard the voice from inside, male, loud, and irritated. "Babe, who is it? I'm in the middle of a raid and I can't pause." Rebecca's face flushed, and she stepped back reluctantly, finally letting me into the apartment I was paying $1,500 a month to maintain. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a combination of stale pizza, unwashed laundry, and something else I couldn't quite identify but definitely didn't like. The second thing I noticed was the state of my beautiful hardwood floors, scuffed and stained, with what looked like beer rings and food stains that had been left to set in. "Mom, this is Tyler," Rebecca said, gesturing toward the couch where a young man in wrinkled pajama pants and a stained t-shirt was hunched over a laptop, a gaming headset covering his ears, completely absorbed in whatever was happening on his screen. Tyler didn't look up, didn't acknowledge my presence at all, just continued clicking and muttering into his microphone about someone named Chad who apparently couldn't play defense worth a damn. I stood there for a full 30 seconds, suitcase in hand, waiting for some kind of greeting, some recognition that another human being had entered the room. When it became clear that none was coming, I cleared my throat. "Nice to meet you, Tyler," I said, loudly enough that he'd have to hear me even through his headset. He held up one finger in a "wait a minute" gesture without looking away from his screen, and I felt my jaw clench. Rebecca noticed my expression and quickly stepped between us. "He's really into this tournament thing," she said, her voice apologetic, but also defensive. "It's kind of important for his streaming career." I wanted to ask what streaming career, wanted to ask why this stranger was treating me like an interruption in my own building, but I bit my tongue. I was here for Rebecca's birthday, not to start a fight with her boyfriend within the first 5 minutes of my visit. "Where should I put my suitcase?" I asked, looking around the apartment I'd spent so much money renovating. The kitchen, which had been pristine when I'd last inspected it, was a disaster zone of dirty dishes and takeout containers. The living room, which had been designed as an elegant space for entertaining, looked like a college dorm room, complete with empty beer bottles and pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table I'd personally selected. "Oh," Rebecca said, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "About that. The guest room is kind of occupied right now." "Occupied?" "Tyler's been setting up his streaming equipment in there," she said quickly. "You know, his computer setup, his lighting, all that stuff. It's a really big deal for him, and he's got this important tournament coming up, so he really needs the space to practice." I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. "So where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" "Well," she said, not meeting my eyes, "I thought maybe you could take the couch. It's actually really comfortable, and it's only for a few nights, right?" The couch. The couch where her boyfriend had been sitting in his stained pajamas, where empty beer bottles and pizza grease had clearly been regular visitors. The couch in the living room of the apartment building I owned, where I'd flown 2,000 miles to celebrate my daughter's birthday. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "I'm your mother. I came here to see you for your birthday. You want me to sleep on the couch so your boyfriend can have a room for his video games?" "It's not just video games, Mom," she said, her voice taking on that defensive edge I remembered from her teenage years. "Tyler's building a brand. He's got sponsors and everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This tournament could really change things for him." I looked over at Tyler, still completely absorbed in his screen, still muttering into his microphone, still acting like I didn't exist. This was the man my daughter was prioritizing over her own mother, the man whose gaming setup was more important than my comfort, more important than basic courtesy. "How long has Tyler been living here?" I asked. "He's not living here," Rebecca said quickly. "He's just staying for a while. His lease ran out and he needed a place to crash while he figures things out." "When did his lease run out?" "A few months ago." A few months. This stranger had been living in my building, in my apartment, for months, and Rebecca had never mentioned it. Not in our weekly phone calls, not in our texts, not even when I'd told her I was planning to visit. "Rebecca, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "you know the lease agreement doesn't allow long-term guests. You could get in trouble with your landlord." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Mom, please. The property management company barely pays attention to this place. As long as the rent gets paid, they don't care what happens." If only she knew, I thought, but I didn't say it. Instead, I looked around the apartment again, really seeing it this time. The damage to the floors, the stains on the walls, the general state of neglect that had clearly been building for months. This wasn't just messiness, this was someone who had stopped caring about the place they lived, someone who had stopped taking pride in their home. "The rent," I said. "You are still paying the rent, right?" "Of course I'm paying the rent," she said, but something in her voice made me pay attention. I mean, Tyler helps out when he can, but his income is kind of irregular right now. Tyler helps out when he can. With irregular income. While using my guest room for his gaming setup and relegating me to the couch during my birthday visit. I stood there in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. This wasn't the independent young woman I'd been so proud of. This was someone who had learned to take advantage of kindness, to prioritize the comfort of a freeloading boyfriend over the respect owed to her own mother. "You know what," I said finally, "let me just get settled in, and we can talk about birthday plans later." Rebecca looked relieved, probably thinking she'd successfully navigated what could have been an awkward conversation. She helped me move Tyler's energy drink cans and gaming magazines off the couch, found me a pillow that didn't smell too strongly of his cologne, and even offered to make me some tea. But as I sat on that couch that night, listening to Tyler's loud gaming session continuing well past midnight, listening to Rebecca laugh at his jokes and bring him snacks while I tried to sleep on furniture that had clearly seen better days, I started to think about things I'd been avoiding for months. Like the fact that Rebecca never seemed to have money for anything anymore, despite having a good job. Like the way she'd started asking for help with emergency expenses, always. With elaborate explanations that sounded reasonable but never quite added up. Like the way she'd stopped inviting me to visit, always having some excuse for why it wasn't a good time. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through the transfers I'd made to Rebecca over the past year. The emergency car repair in February. The unexpected medical bill in April. The temporary help with rent in June when she claimed her company was late with payroll. The one-time assistance with utilities in August when she'd said the bills were higher than expected. $4,000. In the past 8 months alone, I'd sent my daughter $4,000 for various emergencies and unexpected expenses, and here she was, living with a boyfriend who contributed irregular income and treating me like an inconvenient houseguest in my own building. I lay there on that couch, listening to Tyler's gaming session, listening to my daughter's laughter as she watched him play, and I started to add up all the things that hadn't made sense. All the phone calls that had ended abruptly when someone came home. All the times she'd claimed to be too busy to talk but posted pictures of elaborate dinners and expensive outings on social media. All the excuses for why she couldn't visit me in Phoenix, always related to money, always resolved when I offered to pay for her ticket. By the time Tyler finally turned off his equipment at 2:30 a.m., I'd made a decision. Not about revenge, not about punishment, but about truth. About finding out exactly what was happening in my daughter's life, and more importantly, in my building. The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck and the sound of Tyler's alarm going off in the guest room at 11 a.m. Not for work, as it turned out, but for another gaming session, another tournament, another day of treating my daughter's apartment like his personal gaming den while I folded up my blankets and tried to find a place to shower. "Morning, Mom," Rebecca said, appearing in the kitchen in her pajamas, looking refreshed and happy. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, because I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Not until I knew more. "Great. I was thinking we could go to brunch for my birthday. There's this amazing place downtown that does bottomless mimosas." "That sounds lovely," I said. "My treat, of course." "You're the best," she said, hugging me, and for a moment I felt guilty about the suspicions that had kept me awake half the night. This was my daughter, my only child, the little girl who used to make me birthday cards out of construction paper and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world. But then Tyler emerged from the guest room, still in his pajamas, and walked straight to the kitchen without acknowledging me, opening the refrigerator and pulling out orange juice directly from the carton. "Babe," he said to Rebecca, "we're out of eggs. Can you grab some when you're out?" Not, "Good morning." Not, "Hello, Mrs. Crawford." Not even basic human courtesy. Just a demand for groceries delivered to my daughter like she was his personal assistant. "Of course," Rebecca said immediately. "Anything else you need? Maybe some of those energy drinks I like? And pizza rolls. I'm going to be streaming pretty late tonight." I watched this exchange with growing amazement. This man, who contributed irregular income, who had taken over my guest room, who had relegated me to the couch, was making grocery requests like he was the paying tenant and Rebecca was his live-in caretaker. "Tyler," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "what kind of work do you do?" He looked at me like I'd asked him to explain quantum physics, then shrugged. "I'm a content creator. Streaming, mostly. Building my brand." "That must be exciting," I said. "How long have you been doing that?" "About 2 years," he said, taking another swig from the orange juice carton. "It's a slow build, you know? But once you get your breakthrough, you can make serious money. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I'm focusing on content creation full-time. Can't build a brand if you're distracted by some dead-end job. Can't build a brand if you're distracted by some dead-end job. While living rent-free in my building, eating food my daughter bought with money I'd been sending her for emergencies. That's very dedicated of you, I said. He nodded seriously, like I'd complimented his work ethic, then wandered back toward the guest room with his orange juice. He's really passionate about it, Rebecca said after he'd left, her voice defensive again. Not everyone understands the content creation industry, but it's actually a really viable career path. I'm sure it is, I said. For people who are successful at it. Tyler's going to be successful, she said firmly. He just needs time to build his audience. Time. And apparently, free housing, free food, and a personal assistant to handle the grocery shopping while he built his brand in my guest room. We went to brunch, and Rebecca chattered happily about her job, her friends, her plans for the weekend. She seemed genuinely excited to see me, genuinely happy to be celebrating her birthday together. But every time I tried to steer the conversation toward her living situation, toward Tyler, toward her finances, she'd deflect with a smile and change the subject. When the check came, I paid without hesitation, but I noticed the way Rebecca's eyes lingered on the total, the way she seemed to be calculating something in her head. The restaurant wasn't particularly expensive, but she was clearly thinking about money, clearly worried about it, even though I was paying. Rebecca, I said as we walked back to the car, are you having trouble with your finances? No more than anyone else, she said quickly. Seattle's expensive, you know? But I'm managing. Because if you need help. Mom, I'm fine, she said, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested the opposite. I'm 26 years old. I can handle my own life. Can you? I wanted to ask. Can you handle your own life when you're sleeping with a man who doesn't contribute to expenses, who takes over your space, who treats your mother like an inconvenience? Can you handle your own life when you're asking me for emergency money every few months while living in an apartment that's being destroyed by someone who doesn't respect you or your space? But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I smiled and suggested we do some shopping, maybe pick up those groceries Tyler had requested. And as we walked through the grocery store, I watched my daughter carefully select the expensive energy drinks, the name-brand pizza rolls, the organic eggs, all while checking her phone constantly for texts from Tyler about what else he needed. That night, I lay on the couch again, listening to Tyler's gaming session, listening to Rebecca bringing him snacks and drinks, listening to her laugh at his jokes while I tried to find a comfortable position on furniture that seemed to get less comfortable by the hour. And I made another decision. The next morning, while Rebecca was at work and Tyler was still asleep, I made a phone call. Janet? I said when my property manager answered. It's Arlene. I need you to pull the file on the Meridian Apartments, Unit 3B. I want to know everything about the tenant, the payment history, any complaints, any issues. And I want to know if there are any unauthorized occupants. Of course, Ms. Crawford. Is there a problem? I'm not sure yet, I said. But I have a feeling there might be. What Janet told me 20 minutes later confirmed every suspicion I'd been trying to ignore. Rebecca's rent had been late 4 times in the past 6 months. There had been noise complaints from the neighbors about loud gaming sessions lasting until all hours. The upstairs tenant had reported water damage that seemed to be coming from 3B. And most importantly, Janet had received several reports of a man living in the apartment who wasn't on the lease. I was going to bring it to your attention at our next quarterly meeting, Janet said. But since you're asking now, I think we might need to consider whether this tenant is in violation of her lease agreement. This tenant, my own daughter, who had no idea that her landlord was the woman currently sleeping on her couch while her boyfriend used the guest room for his gaming setup. Give me a few more days, I said. I want to document everything properly before we take any action. Of course. Should I prepare a formal notice? Not yet, I said. But start the paperwork. I have a feeling we're going to need it. After I hung up, I sat in Rebecca's kitchen, drinking coffee from a mug that hadn't been properly washed, looking around at the damage that had been done to my property. The beautiful hardwood floors I'd paid to refinish, now scuffed and stained. The granite countertops I'd installed, now chipped and scratched. The crown molding I'd painstakingly restored, now marked with dings and scratches that spoke of carelessness and neglect. This wasn't just about the couch anymore. This wasn't just about Tyler's rudeness or Rebecca's misplaced priorities. This was about respect, responsibility, and the kind of person my daughter had become when she thought no one was watching. Tyler emerged from the guest room around noon, shuffling to the kitchen in his pajamas, opening the refrigerator and surveying the groceries Rebecca and I had bought the day before. "Morning," I said pleasantly. He grunted in response, pulling out the orange juice again. "Big day of streaming ahead?" I asked. "Yeah, there's this tournament," he said, not looking at me. "Pretty important stuff." "I'm curious," I said, "what happens if you don't make it as a content creator? Do you have a backup plan?" He finally looked at me then, his expression somewhere between annoyed and offended. "I don't need a backup plan. This is going to work." "But hypothetically," I pressed, "if it doesn't work out, what would you do?" "It's going to work out," he repeated, more firmly this time. "Rebecca believes in me. She knows I'm going to make it big." "Rebecca believes in you," I thought. Rebecca, who's been asking me for money every few months to cover emergencies that coincidentally started around the time you moved in. Rebecca, who's letting her apartment fall apart while you pursue your streaming dreams in her guest room. "That's nice," I said. "It's good to have someone who supports your dreams." "Yeah, well, not everyone gets it," he said, and I could tell he was including me in that category. "Some people are just too traditional to understand how the world works now. Too traditional to understand how the world works now." Coming from a man who'd been living rent-free in my building for months, whose idea of contribution was irregular income and grocery requests. "You're probably right," I said. "I'm probably too old-fashioned to understand." He nodded, satisfied that he'd educated me about the modern world, and wandered back to the guest room with his orange juice. I spent the rest of the day taking pictures. Not obviously, not in a way that would raise suspicions, but carefully documenting the state of the apartment. The damage to the floors, the stains on the walls, the general neglect that had clearly been building for months. I also took pictures of Tyler's gaming setup, which had indeed taken over the entire guest room, complete with multiple monitors, professional lighting equipment, and a chair that had clearly cost more than most people's monthly rent. When Rebecca came home from work, she found me sitting on the couch, looking through real estate listings on my phone. "What are you looking at?" she asked, settling beside me. "Just some properties in Seattle," I said. "I've been thinking about expanding my portfolio here." "Really? That's exciting. Maybe you could find something in this neighborhood. I love living here." "It is a nice area," I agreed. "Great old buildings, good bones. Though I imagine the rent must be pretty steep." "It's not too bad," she said, but I caught the slight hesitation in her voice. "I mean, it's manageable." "That's good. I'd hate to think you were struggling with the rent, especially with Tyler not working a traditional job." "Mom," she said, her voice taking on that warning tone, "Tyler is working. Content creation is real work." "Of course it is," I said quickly. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just meant that income from creative work can be unpredictable. "It can be," she admitted. "But we're managing fine." "We." She said we, like she and Tyler were a team, like they were partners sharing the load equally. But from what I'd observed, Tyler's contribution seemed to be limited to consuming groceries and generating noise complaints. That evening, we ordered pizza for dinner, my treat again, and I watched Tyler demolish half of it while Rebecca picked at a single slice, claiming she wasn't very hungry. But I noticed the way she kept checking her phone, the way she seemed distracted and worried about something. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. "Fine," she said, but then Tyler's phone buzzed with a notification, and his face lit up. "Babe, the tournament registration is due tonight," he said excitedly. "It's only $50, but I'm a little short right now." I watched Rebecca's face as she processed this request, saw the brief flash of stress before she nodded and reached for her purse. "Of course," she said. "This is important." $50 for a tournament registration, while she picked at her dinner and worried about money. $50 that would come out of her budget, or maybe out of the next emergency she'd need to ask me to help with. "What kind of tournament is it?" I asked Tyler. "It's a major qualifying event," he said, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "If I place well, I could get invited to the championship bracket. The winner gets $10,000. $10,000. For playing video games. While living rent-free in my building and eating food my daughter bought with money I'd been sending her." "That sounds exciting," I said. "What are the odds of winning?" "Well, there are about 500 participants," he said, "but I've been practicing really hard. I think I have a real shot." 500 participants. One winner. $10,000 prize. But he needed $50 from my daughter to enter, $50 she clearly didn't have to spare. I watched Rebecca hand him the money, watched the relief on his face as he immediately pulled out his phone to register. I watched my daughter smile at his excitement, watched her pretend that $50 wasn't a significant expense for her, watched her enable his delusions while sacrificing her own financial stability. That night, as I lay on the couch for the third time, listening to Tyler's extended practice session for his tournament, I pulled out my phone and did some research. I looked up content creation income statistics, tournament prize distributions, the likelihood of making a living as a gaming streamer. What I found wasn't encouraging for Tyler's prospects, but it was very enlightening about the situation my daughter had gotten herself into. The average income for content creators in Tyler's category was less than minimum wage. The vast majority never made enough to support themselves, let alone contribute to household expenses. The tournaments he was so excited about had prize pools that were divided among dozens of winners, with most participants receiving nothing. And the content creators who did make significant money had been building their brands for years, with massive time and financial investments that Tyler clearly hadn't made. In other words, Tyler's streaming career was less a viable business plan and more an expensive hobby that my daughter was subsidizing with money she didn't have. I also did some quick calculations based on what I'd observed. If Tyler had been living there for a few months, as Rebecca claimed, and if Rebecca was paying full rent on her own while supporting Tyler's expenses, and if she'd been asking me for emergency money every few months, then the math was simple and depressing. My daughter was paying $1,500 a month in rent, plus utilities, plus groceries, plus Tyler's expenses, plus his tournament registrations, plus whatever other costs came with supporting a grown man's gaming habit. On her marketing salary, which I knew was decent but not extravagant, she was probably barely breaking even each month, if that. Which explained the emergencies. The car repair that was probably just regular maintenance she couldn't afford. The medical bill that was probably just a routine visit she'd had to put on a payment plan. The help with rent when her company was late with payroll, which was probably just her running out of money after covering Tyler's expenses. My daughter wasn't having legitimate emergencies. She was having Tyler emergencies. She was slowly going broke supporting a man who thought her mother should sleep on the couch so he could have a gaming room. By the fourth morning, I'd made my decision. Not about punishment or revenge, but about truth and consequences. About teaching my daughter the difference between love and enabling, between support and exploitation. I waited until Rebecca left for work, until Tyler was settled into his morning gaming session with his headphones on and his door closed. Then I made a phone call. Janet, it's Arlene again. I want you to prepare a formal lease violation notice for Unit 3B. Unauthorized occupant, property damage, and late rent payments. I want it served today. Are you sure, Miss Crawford? Once we start the formal process, it's difficult to reverse. I'm sure, I said, looking around at the damage to my property, listening to Tyler's loud gaming session that was probably disturbing the neighbors at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. I'm very sure. I'll have it prepared within the hour. Should I deliver it personally? No, I said. Send it by certified mail, and also post it on the door according to standard procedure. I want everything documented properly. After I hung up, I sat in Rebecca's kitchen and waited. Not for Tyler to finish his gaming session, not for Rebecca to come home from work, but for my daughter to learn that actions have consequences, that choices have costs, and that sometimes the people you take for granted are the ones who hold all the power. The certified letter arrived at exactly 2:47 p.m., according to the timestamp on my phone when I photographed Tyler signing for it. He'd emerged from the guest room looking annoyed at being interrupted during what he'd loudly proclaimed was a crucial practice match for his upcoming tournament. The mail carrier had rung the doorbell 3 times before Tyler finally responded, shuffling to the door in his usual uniform of wrinkled pajama pants and yesterday's t-shirt. I watched from the kitchen window as he scrawled his signature on the delivery receipt, completely oblivious to what he was accepting. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with the Meridian Property Management letterhead clearly visible even from my vantage point. Tyler glanced at it briefly, probably assuming it was some routine building notice about maintenance or policy updates, and tossed it onto the coffee table before heading back to his gaming setup. For the next 3 hours, that envelope sat there like a ticking bomb while Tyler continued his online matches, occasionally shouting instructions or complaints at his screen. I found myself checking the time obsessively, wondering when Rebecca would get home, wondering how long it would take for them to actually open and read the notice that would change everything. Rebecca walked through the door at 6:15 p.m., looking tired from her day at the marketing firm but brightening when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "Hey Mom," she said, dropping her purse by the door and kicking off her heels. "How was your day? Did you and Tyler manage to coexist peacefully?" "Oh, we barely interacted," I said truthfully. "He's been quite focused on his practice sessions." She smiled fondly in the direction of the guest room, where Tyler's voice could be heard through the closed door, alternating between strategic callouts and creative profanity. He's so dedicated. I really admire his commitment to his craft. His craft. As if playing video games 12 hours a day while living rent-free constituted some sort of artistic pursuit worthy of admiration and financial support. Rebecca, I said carefully, there's some mail for you on the coffee table. It looks official. She glanced over at the envelope, still lying where Tyler had left it, and shrugged. Probably just something from the building management. They're always sending notices about noise policies or lease renewals. You might want to read it, I suggested. It was delivered by certified mail. That got her attention. Certified mail usually meant something important, something that required documentation and acknowledgement. She walked over to the coffee table, picked up the envelope, and I watched her face carefully as she read the return address. Meridian Property Management, she read aloud, then looked at me with a slight frown. That's weird. They usually just slip notices under the door. Why don't you open it? I said, my voice neutral despite the way my heart was pounding. She tore open the envelope and pulled out the official notice, her eyes scanning the formal language. I watched her expression change from mild curiosity to confusion, then from confusion to alarm, and finally from alarm to something approaching panic. What is it, sweetheart? I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. It's a lease violation notice, she said, her voice hollow. They're saying I have an unauthorized occupant, that there's been property damage, and that my rent payments have been consistently late. From the guest room, Tyler's voice rose in triumph as he apparently achieved some gaming milestone, completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding in the living room. That's ridiculous, Rebecca continued, her voice gaining strength as indignation replaced shock. I mean, Tyler's just staying here temporarily while he gets back on his feet. And I've never been late with rent. Well, maybe a few times, but not consistently. I said nothing, just watched as she reread the notice, her face growing paler with each pass through the formal language. They're giving me 30 days to remedy the violations or face eviction proceedings, she said, looking up at me with wide eyes. Mom, what am I going to do? I can't get evicted. I love this apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me. She loved the apartment that she'd been systematically destroying, loved the building that I owned and maintained, loved the home that she'd been taking for granted while prioritizing her boyfriend's comfort over basic respect for the property. What does Tyler think about this? I asked. Tyler? She looked toward the guest room as if she'd forgotten he existed. I should tell him. She walked to the guest room door and knocked, waited for a response, then knocked again more loudly. Finally, Tyler's voice came through the door, irritated and distracted. Kind of in the middle of something, babe. Can it wait? Tyler, this is important, Rebecca called back. We got a notice from the building management. What kind of notice? A lease violation notice. About you living here. There was a pause, during which I could hear Tyler saying something to his online teammates about taking a quick break. A moment later, the door opened and he emerged, headset around his neck, looking more annoyed than concerned. What's this about? He asked, reaching for the notice in Rebecca's hands. I watched him read it, watched his expression shift from annoyance to confusion to something that looked suspiciously like calculation rather than genuine concern. This is harassment, he said finally. They can't just decide I'm an unauthorized occupant. I'm a guest. You've been here for 4 months, Tyler, Rebecca said quietly. So? There's no law against having a long-term guest. Besides, they can't prove I actually live here. I still get mail at my old address. The fact that he still got mail at his old address because he'd never officially changed his address, probably to avoid exactly this kind of situation, didn't seem to occur to either of them as evidence of his deceptive intent. What about the property damage? Rebecca asked, scanning the notice again. They mentioned scuff marks on the hardwood floors and stains on the walls. Tyler shrugged. Normal wear and tear. That's not the tenant's responsibility. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that the kind of damage described in the notice went well beyond normal wear and tear, that it was the result of months of carelessness and neglect that I'd been documenting with my phone camera for the past 4 days. And the late rent payments? Rebecca continued. That's not my fault, Tyler said quickly. That's between you and the landlord. Not my fault. As if the reason for those late payments, the reason Rebecca had been struggling financially, had nothing to do with supporting his gaming habit and covering his expenses. Tyler, Rebecca said, her voice strained, what am I supposed to do about this? If I get evicted, where are we going to live? Where are we going to live? Not where am I going to live, but where are we going to live? As if Tyler's housing situation was automatically her responsibility, as if his presence in her life meant she was obligated to solve his problems along with her own. We'll figure something out, Tyler said vaguely. Maybe we can find a place together. Split the costs. Split the costs. Coming from a man who hadn't contributed meaningfully to their current housing costs, who had taken over her guest room and relegated her mother to the couch, who spent his days playing video games while she worked to support them both. With what money? Rebecca asked, and I heard the edge of desperation creeping into her voice. Tyler, I can barely afford this place on my own, and that's with help from my mom for emergencies. Help from my mom for emergencies. The truth was finally coming out, the admission that the money I'd been sending wasn't for legitimate unexpected expenses but for covering the shortfall created by supporting Tyler's lifestyle. I told you, I'm building my brand, Tyler said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. Once I start making real money from streaming, we'll be fine. This tournament could change everything. This tournament. The same tournament he'd needed Rebecca to pay $50 to enter, the same tournament with 500 participants and one winner, the same tournament that represented his entire financial strategy for the future. When, Tyler? Rebecca asked, and I could hear years of frustration boiling over. When is this going to start paying off? Because I can't keep doing this. I can't keep covering everything while you chase this dream. It's not a dream, Tyler snapped. It's a legitimate career path. Just because you don't understand the industry doesn't mean it's not real. I understand that we might get evicted because I can't afford the rent when I'm supporting two people on one salary, Rebecca shot back. Finally, she was saying out loud what had been obvious to me from the moment I arrived. She was supporting two people on one salary, carrying the full financial burden while Tyler pursued his gaming career without contributing to their basic living expenses. I never asked you to support me, Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. You didn't have to ask, Rebecca said quietly. You just moved in and assumed I'd handle everything. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentment and financial stress. I sat in the kitchen, listening to my daughter finally confront the reality of her situation, finally admit that she'd been enabling someone who had been taking advantage of her generosity. Look, Tyler said finally, his voice softer, more conciliatory, this notice doesn't mean anything. We can fight it. Landlords send these things all the time to scare tenants. They probably don't even have grounds for eviction. If only he knew that the landlord was sitting 20 feet away, documenting every word of this conversation, building a case that would hold up in any housing court in the country. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer, Rebecca said uncertainly. Lawyers are expensive, Tyler pointed out. And this will probably just blow over. Building management companies are usually all talk. Tyler, I can't take that risk, Rebecca said. If I get evicted, it goes on my credit report. It affects my ability to rent anywhere else. This isn't a game. Neither is my career, Tyler replied, and I could hear the familiar note of self-righteousness creeping back into his voice. Just because it's not a traditional 9-to-5 job doesn't mean it's not important. Your career isn't paying the rent, Rebecca said bluntly. Yet, Tyler said. It's not paying the rent yet. But it will. Yet. As if his eventual success was guaranteed, as if Rebecca just needed to be patient a little longer while he figured out how to monetize his gaming skills. How much longer am I supposed to wait? Rebecca asked. How much longer am I supposed to carry all the financial responsibility while you build your brand? As long as it takes, Tyler said, and I could hear the entitlement in his voice. The assumption that Rebecca's support was unlimited and unconditional. That's what partners do. They support each other's dreams. Partners. As if their relationship was an equal partnership, as if Tyler's contribution of moral support and companionship was equivalent to Rebecca's contribution of housing, food, and financial stability. I listened to them continue this argument, this long overdue conversation about money and responsibility and the future, and I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Rebecca was finally confronting reality, finally questioning the arrangement that had been slowly draining her resources and self-respect. Sadness that it had taken a legal threat to force this conversation, that my daughter had been struggling in silence rather than asking for real help or setting appropriate boundaries. The argument went on for another hour, cycling through the same themes again and again. Tyler's insistence that his streaming career was viable and just needed more time. Rebecca's growing frustration with carrying all the financial burden. Tyler's dismissal of the lease violation notice as harassment. Rebecca's genuine fear of eviction and its consequences. Through it all, I said nothing, just sat in the kitchen pretending to read my book while absorbing every word. This wasn't my fight, not yet. This was Rebecca's moment to decide what kind of person she wanted to be, what kind of relationship she was willing to accept, what kind of future she was willing to build. By the time they finished arguing, it was nearly 9 p.m. and nothing had been resolved. Tyler had returned to his gaming session, claiming he needed to practice for his tournament and couldn't be distracted by landlord drama. Rebecca sat on the couch, staring at the lease violation notice, looking more lost and overwhelmed than I'd seen her since she was a teenager. "Mom," she said finally, "what would you do?" "What would I do?" After 4 days of sleeping on the couch, for days of watching Tyler treat her apartment like his personal gaming center, for days of seeing my daughter sacrifice her financial stability and self-respect for a man who couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge her mother's presence. "I think," I said carefully, "that you need to decide what kind of life you want to live. And whether Tyler is helping you build that life or preventing you from having it." She was quiet for a long moment, turning the notice over in her hands. Like it might reveal some hidden solution. "I love him," she said finally. "I know you do," I replied. "But love isn't supposed to cost you everything. Love isn't supposed to leave you struggling to pay rent and asking your mother for emergency money every few months." She looked up at me sharply. "You think Tyler is the reason I've needed help?" "I think you started needing help around the time Tyler moved in," I said gently. "And I think you're capable of doing the math on that yourself." Another long silence, during which Tyler's voice could be heard through the guest room door, celebrating another gaming victory with the same enthusiasm he'd shown when Rebecca had given him $50 for his tournament registration. "What if I ask him to leave?" Rebecca said quietly. "What if you do? What if he doesn't want to go?" "Then you'll know something important about who he really is," I said. She nodded slowly, still staring at the notice, still processing the reality of her situation. The apartment was quiet except for Tyler's gaming session, and I found myself hoping that my daughter would find the strength to choose herself, to choose her future, to choose the kind of life that didn't require her to sacrifice everything for someone else's dreams. The next morning brought a new crisis, though Tyler didn't seem to recognize it as such. Rebecca had left for work early, claiming she had an important presentation to prepare, but I suspected she needed time away from the apartment to think about everything that had been said the night before. Tyler emerged from the guest room around 11 a.m., later than usual, and immediately started rummaging through the refrigerator with the focused intensity of someone looking for specific items. "We're out of those energy drinks," he announced, as if this was a household emergency requiring immediate attention. "I'm sure Rebecca can pick some up after work," I said neutrally. "I need them for my tournament today," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'll just ask her to grab some on her lunch break." I watched him type out a text message, probably asking Rebecca to interrupt her workday to handle his shopping needs, and felt my patience finally snap. "Tyler," I said, "don't you think Rebecca has enough to worry about right now?" He looked up from his phone, confused. "What do you mean?" "The lease violation notice. The possibility of eviction. The financial stress she's been dealing with." "Oh, that," he said dismissively. "I told her it's probably nothing. Landlords send those things all the time." "And if it's not nothing? If she actually gets evicted?" He shrugged. "We'll figure something out. Find a new place." "With what money?" "I'll help out more once the tournament money starts coming in." Once the tournament money starts coming in. As if winning was guaranteed, as if his $50 investment was certain to pay off in a windfall that would solve all their problems. "Tyler," I said, choosing my words carefully, "what if you don't win the tournament?" "I will," he said confidently. "But what if you don't? What if none of the tournaments pay off? What if streaming doesn't become profitable? What's your backup plan?" He stared at me like I'd suggested he abandon his deepest dreams and settle for a life of mediocrity. "There's no backup plan," he said finally. "Because I don't need one. This is going to work." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I'm good at this. Because I've put in the time and effort. Because I believe in myself, even if nobody else does." Nobody else does. Including, apparently, the woman who was supporting him financially while he pursued his dreams, the woman who was facing eviction because she couldn't afford to carry both of them, the woman who had been asking her mother for emergency money to cover the shortfall his presence had created. "Rebecca believes in you," I pointed out. "Yeah, she does," he said, and for the first time, his voice softened slightly. "She's been amazing. Really supportive." "Financially supportive?" "Among other things." "Exclusively financially supportive?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you contribute to this relationship besides her believing in your dreams?" "I contribute a lot," he said defensively. "Emotional support, companionship, shared interests." "What about shared expenses?" "Money isn't everything," he said, and I could hear the practiced quality of his response, as if he'd had this conversation before. "Money isn't everything," I agreed, "but it's something." And when one person is carrying all the financial burden while the other person pursues expensive hobbies, that creates an imbalance. It's not a hobby, Tyler said, his voice rising. It's a career. Just because it's not traditional doesn't mean it's not legitimate. You're right, I said. It's not about whether it's traditional. It's about whether it's sustainable. Whether it's fair to ask someone else to support you while you build something that might never become profitable. Rebecca doesn't mind supporting me. Are you sure about that? Of course I'm sure. We're partners. Partners usually share responsibilities as well as dreams. I'll start contributing more once I start making money. When will that be? Soon. How soon? I don't know exactly, but soon. Soon. The same vague timeline he'd probably been giving Rebecca for months, the same indefinite promise that justified his continued dependence on her resources. Tyler, I said, what if soon never comes? What if you're still not making money 6 months from now, or a year from now? How long is Rebecca supposed to wait? As long as it takes, he said, and there it was again, that sense of entitlement. That assumption that Rebecca's support was unlimited and unconditional. Even if it means she gets evicted? Even if it ruins her credit? Even if it damages her relationship with her family? It won't come to that, he said, but he sounded less certain now. It already has come to that, I pointed out. She's facing eviction right now. She's been asking her mother for emergency money for months. The relationship with her family is already being damaged. That's not my fault. Whose fault is it? The landlord's, for sending that notice. Your daughter's, for not budgeting better. The economy's, for making everything so expensive. Everyone's fault but his own. The landlord was wrong for enforcing lease terms. Rebecca was wrong for not budgeting better while supporting 2 people on 1 income. The economy was wrong for making housing expensive. But Tyler wasn't wrong for living rent-free while pursuing dreams that weren't generating income. Tyler, I said, what would happen if you moved out? What do you mean? I mean, if you found your own place, got your own apartment, paid your own rent. What would happen to Rebecca's financial situation? He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him doing calculations in his head, probably for the first time really considering the impact of his presence on Rebecca's budget. She'd have more money, he admitted reluctantly. A lot more money? I guess. Enough money that she wouldn't need to ask her mother for help with emergencies? Probably. Enough money that she could pay her rent on time and avoid eviction notices? Maybe. Maybe. As if it wasn't obvious that removing a non-contributing household member would dramatically improve Rebecca's financial situation. So why don't you move out? Because we're together. Because we love each other. Because relationships require sacrifice. Who's making the sacrifices in this relationship? Both of us. What sacrifices are you making? I'm sacrificing immediate income to build something bigger. I'm investing in our future. With whose money? With the money we have. The money Rebecca earns at her job while you play video games? While I build my brand, he corrected, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Tyler, I said gently, do you see how this looks from the outside? Do you see how it might look to Rebecca's family? How does it look? It looks like you're taking advantage of her generosity. It looks like you're using her financial resources to support your lifestyle while contributing nothing in return. That's not what's happening. Then what is happening? I'm building something. I'm working toward a future that will benefit both of us. When? When what? When will this future start benefiting Rebecca? When will she see any return on the investment she's been making in your dreams? Soon, he said again, but the word sounded hollow now, empty of the confidence it had carried before. Tyler, I said, what if I told you that Rebecca has been lying to me about why she needs money? What if I told you that every emergency she's asked me to help with has been directly related to covering expenses that you should be helping with? That's not true. The car repair that cost her $800? That was routine maintenance she couldn't afford because she'd spent her car fund on groceries and utilities for both of you. The medical bill she needed help with? That was a basic doctor's visit she had to put on a payment plan because she didn't have $200 available. The rent help she needed when her company was supposedly late with payroll? Her company was never late with payroll. She just ran out of money after covering your share of the expenses. Tyler stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, denial, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. She didn't tell me any of that, he said quietly. Because she didn't want you to feel guilty. Because she loves you and wants to support your dreams. Because she's been sacrificing her financial stability to protect your feelings. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. It was easier to believe that her struggles were just bad luck, just the economy, just anything other than the direct result of your presence in her life. He sat down heavily on the couch, still holding his phone with the unsent text asking Rebecca to buy energy drinks on her lunch break. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "You're supposed to decide what kind of man you want to be," I said. "Whether you want to be someone who builds his dreams on someone else's sacrifice, or someone who takes responsibility for his own life. But if I move out, if I get a regular job, I'll have to give up streaming. Maybe. Or maybe you'll have to treat streaming like what it actually is right now, which is a hobby that you do in your spare time while you support yourself like an adult. That's not fair. What's not fair is expecting Rebecca to fund your dreams while you contribute nothing to the relationship except emotional support and the promise of future success. She believes in me. She believes in you enough to sacrifice her own financial security. The question is whether you care about her enough to stop letting her do that." Tyler sat in silence for a long time, staring at his phone, probably considering for the first time the real cost of his dreams. Not the cost to himself, but the cost to the person who loved him enough to pay it. "I need to think," he said. Finally. "Yes," I said. "You do." He went back to the guest room, but for the first time since I'd arrived, I didn't hear the sound of gaming starting up immediately. Instead, there was just silence, the kind of silence that comes when someone is finally forced to confront truths they've been avoiding. I sat in the kitchen, drinking my coffee and looking around at the apartment that I owned, the building that I maintained, the investment that had been slowly deteriorating under the care of tenants who had no idea they were destroying their landlord's property while she slept on their couch. In a few hours, Rebecca would come home from work, and Tyler would have to decide what kind of conversation he was ready to have. Whether he was ready to admit that his dreams had been funded by her sacrifice, whether he was ready to take responsibility for the situation they were in, whether he was ready to be the kind of partner who contributed rather than just consumed. And I would have to decide how much longer I was willing to watch my daughter sacrifice herself for someone who had never shown any indication that he was worth it. Rebecca came home that evening with grocery bags in both hands and dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there when she left for work that morning. She'd clearly spent her lunch break shopping instead of eating, probably trying to stock up on Tyler's requested energy drinks and whatever other supplies he deemed necessary for his tournament preparation. The sight of my daughter sacrificing her own basic needs to accommodate someone else's demands made my chest tighten with a familiar mixture of love and frustration. "Hey Mom," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter with a tired sigh. "How was your day?" "Enlightening," I said truthfully. Tyler and I had quite a conversation. Her face immediately tensed, and I could see her mentally preparing for damage control, probably wondering what Tyler might have said or done to offend me further. "What kind of conversation?" she asked carefully. "The kind where someone finally asks the hard questions that should have been asked months ago." She began unpacking groceries with mechanical precision, avoiding my eyes as she lined up energy drinks in the refrigerator like colorful soldiers preparing for battle. Her movements were efficient but joyless, the actions of someone who had long since stopped finding pleasure in the simple act of caring for her home. "Mom, I know this situation isn't ideal," she said finally. "I know having Tyler here while you're visiting isn't exactly what you expected. But it's temporary, and he's really close to making some breakthroughs with his streaming." Temporary. The same word she'd probably been using to justify this arrangement to herself for months, the same indefinite timeline that allowed Tyler to avoid taking responsibility for his impact on her life. "Rebecca," I said gently, "how long has Tyler been telling you that his breakthrough is coming soon?" She paused in her unpacking, a can of energy drink halfway to the refrigerator, and I could see her doing mental calculations. "It's a competitive industry," she said finally. "These things take time." "How much time?" "However long it takes." "However long it takes." The exact phrase Tyler had used that morning, the same open-ended commitment that justified endless sacrifice with no guaranteed return. "And in the meantime, you're supposed to carry all the financial responsibility?" "We're partners," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Partners support each other." "Do they?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like only one partner is doing the supporting." She slammed the refrigerator door harder than necessary. And when she turned to face me, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You don't understand," she said. "Tyler isn't like other people. He's got real talent, real potential. He just needs someone who believes in him." "I believe that you believe in him," I said carefully. "But believing in someone's potential doesn't mean you're obligated to fund it indefinitely. It's not indefinite. He's going to start making money soon." "When?" "Soon." "That's not an answer, Rebecca. That's a hope." She turned back to the groceries, pulling out packages of expensive organic food that I knew she probably couldn't afford but had bought anyway because Tyler preferred name brands over store brands, because keeping him happy had become more important than keeping herself financially stable. "Look," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I know you're concerned about me. I know you think Tyler is taking advantage. But you don't see what I see. You don't see how hard he works, how passionate he is about what he's doing." "I see how hard you work," I said. "I see how passionate you are about supporting him. The question is whether he's equally passionate about supporting you." "He is. Just in different ways." "What ways?" "Emotional support. Companionship. He makes me laugh." Emotional support, companionship, and laughter. Important things in a relationship, certainly, but not exactly equivalent to paying rent, buying groceries, and covering utilities for two people on one income. "Rebecca," I said, "what would happen if you got sick and couldn't work for a month? Who would pay the bills?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with the reality that she'd probably never allowed herself to fully consider. "We'd figure it out," she said finally. "How?" "Tyler would, he'd find a way to help." "How? With what money?" "He'd get a temporary job or something." "If he can get a temporary job when you need him to, why can't he get one now to help with expenses?" "Because that would interfere with his streaming schedule." "And your financial stress doesn't interfere with his streaming schedule?" "That's different." "How is it different?" "Because..." She started, then stopped, apparently unable to articulate how her struggle to pay bills was somehow less important than Tyler's need for uninterrupted gaming time. From the guest room came the familiar sounds of Tyler's tournament beginning, the clicking of keys and the excited commentary that meant he was fully absorbed in his competition. The tournament that Rebecca had paid $50 to enter, the tournament that represented his entire financial strategy for the future. "He's starting his tournament," Rebecca said, as if this explained everything, as if Tyler's gaming schedule was the organizing principle around which all other considerations should revolve. "Yes, I can hear that. This could be really big. For him. The prize money would solve a lot of our problems." "Our problems?" As if Tyler's lack of income was a shared responsibility rather than a personal choice he was making at Rebecca's expense. "What if he doesn't win?" "He will." "What if he doesn't?" "Then there will be other tournaments." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, we keep doing what we're doing." "What we're doing?" Which was Rebecca working full-time to support two adults while Tyler played video games and made demands for energy drinks and grocery runs. "Rebecca," I said, "do you remember when you were little and you wanted that expensive dollhouse for Christmas?" She looked at me with confusion, probably wondering why I was bringing up childhood memories in the middle of a conversation about her relationship problems. "The Victorian one with all the tiny furniture," she said. "Yeah, I remember. You wanted it so badly that you were willing to give up presents for your birthday, willing to do extra chores for months, willing to save every penny of your allowance. So you were 8 years old, and you understood that if you wanted something expensive, you had to contribute to making it happen. You didn't just expect other people to pay for your dreams." Her face flushed, and I could see that the parallel had hit home. "That's not the same thing," she said. "Isn't it? You're funding Tyler's dreams the same way I funded your dollhouse. Except you were 8 and willing to make sacrifices for what you wanted. Tyler is a grown man who expects you to make all the sacrifices while he pursues what he wants. Tyler doesn't expect anything. Doesn't he? Who bought those energy drinks in the refrigerator?" "I did." "Who asked you to buy them?" "Tyler. Mentioned he was running low. And you automatically took responsibility for replacing them?" "It's not a big deal. It's $50 worth of energy drinks, Rebecca. For one person. For 1 week." She stared at the refrigerator as if seeing the colorful cans for the first time, probably calculating for the first time how much money she'd been spending on Tyler's specialized dietary requirements. "I just want him to be successful," she said quietly. "I know you do. But wanting someone to be successful doesn't mean you're responsible for funding their attempts at success." "What am I supposed to do? Kick him out?" "I'm supposed to ask you what you want to do. What would make you happy, Rebecca? What would make you feel secure and respected and valued?" She was quiet for a long time, and I could hear Tyler's commentary from the guest room, his voice rising with excitement as he navigated some crucial moment in his tournament. "I want to not worry about money all the time," she said finally. "When did you start worrying about money all the time?" "I don't know. Gradually." "When Tyler moved in?" "Around that time, I guess." "And before he moved in?" "Before he moved in, I was doing fine. I had savings. I could afford to go out with friends, buy clothes, take vacations." "What happened to your savings?" "Life happened. Unexpected expenses." "What kind of unexpected expenses?" She was quiet again, and I could see her mentally reviewing the past few months, probably recognizing for the first time the pattern. That had been draining her resources. Food costs went up, she said slowly. Utilities got more expensive. There were more fees and charges for things. Because you were supporting 2 people instead of 1? I guess. Rebecca, there's no guessing about it. Your expenses doubled when Tyler moved in, but your income stayed the same. That's basic math. But he's supposed to start contributing soon. When? When he starts making money. When will that be? I don't know. So you're supposed to keep spending money you don't have on supporting someone who might never be able to contribute financially? He will contribute. I believe in him. What if your belief doesn't pay the bills? Before she could answer, Tyler's voice erupted from the guest room in frustration, apparently having been eliminated from his tournament earlier than expected. A moment later, the door opened and he emerged, his face flushed with disappointment and anger. This is bullshit, he announced to the room in general. That guy was clearly cheating. There's no way he could have made that move legitimately. Rebecca immediately shifted into caretaker mode, her own problems forgotten in the face of Tyler's disappointment. I'm sorry, baby, she said, moving toward him. I know how much this tournament meant to you. It's not fair, Tyler continued, apparently needing to vent his frustration to an audience. I've been practicing for weeks. I should have made it to at least the semifinals. The semifinals? Of a tournament with 500 participants, where making it to the semifinals would still mean no prize money, no return on Rebecca's $50 investment, no contribution to their household expenses. There will be other tournaments, Rebecca said, rubbing his shoulders in a gesture that was both comforting and enabling. Yeah, but this was supposed to be the big one. This was supposed to be my breakthrough. His breakthrough. The same breakthrough. That was always just one tournament away, always just one streaming session away, always just one more investment away from transforming their financial situation. Maybe you should take a break, Rebecca suggested gently. Get some food, relax. A little. I can't take a break. There's another qualifier tomorrow, and I need to be ready. Another qualifier. Another $50 entry fee that Rebecca would pay without question, another day of Tyler's undivided attention going to his gaming while she handled all the practical responsibilities of their shared life. Tyler, I said, speaking for the first time since he'd emerged from his defeat, what's your backup plan? He looked at me with the same expression he'd worn that morning, as if I'd asked him to abandon his deepest dreams. I don't have a backup plan, he said. I don't need one. Everyone needs a backup plan. Not if you're committed to success. Even the most successful people have backup plans. They're called being responsible adults. I am a responsible adult, he said, his voice rising defensively. Responsible adults contribute to their household expenses. I contribute in other ways. What ways? Emotional support. I'm here for Rebecca when she needs me. When she needs you to do what? When she needs someone to talk to. Someone who cares about her. Do you care about her enough to get a job so she doesn't have to ask her mother for emergency money every few months? Tyler's face went through several expressions, from confusion to understanding to something that looked like guilt. What emergency money? He asked, looking between Rebecca and me. Rebecca's face had gone pale, and I could see her mentally scrambling for a way to explain this without making Tyler feel guilty, without forcing him to confront the reality of how his presence had affected her finances. It's not a big deal, she said quickly. Just occasional help when things get tight. What kind of help? Tyler pressed. Just temporary assistance, Rebecca said. Car repairs, medical bills, that kind of thing. How much assistance? Tyler, it doesn't matter. How much, Rebecca? She looked at me helplessly, probably hoping I would change the subject or find some way to minimize the impact of what she was about to reveal. A few $1,000s, she said finally. Over the past year. A few $1,000s? Tyler repeated, and I could see him doing calculations, probably for the first time really considering how much money Rebecca had been spending to support their lifestyle. It's just temporary, Rebecca said again. Until you start making money. From streaming. What if I don't start making money from streaming? The question hung in the air like a challenge, probably the first time Tyler had ever voiced doubt about his gaming career, the first time he'd allowed himself to consider the possibility that his dreams might not become reality. You will. Rebecca said automatically. But what if I don't? Then we'll figure something else out. What something else? I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get there. Rebecca, Tyler said slowly, how much money have you spent supporting me? It's not about the money. How much? Tyler, please don't do this. How much money have you spent on groceries for both of us? Utilities for both of us? Tournament entry fees? Energy drinks? All the things I eat and drink and use without paying for? Rebecca was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she tried to avoid answering questions that would force both of them to confront the reality of their relationship. I don't keep track, she said. I don't think about it that way. Maybe you should think about it that way, Tyler said, and his voice had lost its defensive edge, replaced by something that sounded like genuine remorse. Maybe I should think about it that way. He sat down heavily on the couch, putting his head in his hands, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a man rather than an overgrown teenager. I've been taking advantage of you, he said quietly. No, you haven't, Rebecca said immediately. We're partners. Partners help each other. Partners help each other, Tyler repeated. What help have I been giving you? Emotional support. Companionship. What else? That's enough. Is it? Is emotional support enough to justify someone else paying all your bills? Tyler, don't do this to yourself. I'm not doing this to myself. I'm finally seeing what I've been doing to you. He looked up at Rebecca, then at me, and I could see something shifting in his expression, some recognition that had been a long time coming. I've been living here for 4 months, he said. 4 months of you paying for everything while I played video games and convinced myself I was building a career. You are building a career, Rebecca insisted. Am I? Really? How much money have I made in 4 months? That's not the point. That's exactly the point. How much money have I contributed to this household in 4 months? Rebecca was quiet, unable to answer because the answer was zero, because Tyler hadn't contributed financially in any meaningful way since he'd moved in. I've been a parasite, Tyler said, and his voice was heavy with a recognition that seemed to surprise him. I've been living off your work, your money, your generosity, while telling myself that I was pursuing my dreams. Don't say that, Rebecca pleaded. It's true, isn't it? You work 40 hours a week to pay for this apartment, and I play video games 40 hours a week in the room that's supposed to be for guests. You buy groceries that I eat, pay utilities that I use, cover tournament fees that I lose. Tyler, please. Your mother has been sending you money to cover the difference between what you can afford and what it actually costs to support both of us, and I convinced myself that your financial problems were just bad luck. They are bad luck. No, they're not. They're Tyler luck. They're the predictable result of supporting someone who doesn't support you back. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back, his hands running through his hair as he processed this long overdue realization. I need to get a job, he said. Tyler, no, Rebecca said immediately. You're so close to breaking through. Don't give up now. Breaking through to what? I've been trying to make money streaming for 2 years, and I've made less than $100 total. That's $50 a year, Rebecca. That's not a career, that's an expensive hobby. But you love it. I love a lot of things. I love sleeping until noon, I love eating expensive food, I love not having any responsibilities. But none of those things justify making someone else pay for my lifestyle. It's not forever. How do you know? How does anyone know? What if I never make significant money streaming? What if this is just a fantasy I've been using to avoid growing up? Rebecca was sobbing now, probably mourning not just Tyler's potential departure but the dream they'd both been clinging to, the fantasy. That love and belief were enough to overcome financial reality. I don't want you to give up your dreams, she said through her tears. Maybe my dreams need to grow up, Tyler said. Maybe I need to dream about being the kind of man who contributes to his relationship instead of just consuming from it. He looked at me then, and I could see something like apology in his expression. I owe you an apology, he said. For the way I've treated you since you've been here. For acting like you were an inconvenience in your daughter's home. For taking over the guest room and making you sleep on the couch. Thank you, I said quietly. I also owe Rebecca an apology, he continued. For letting her sacrifice her financial security for my gaming habit. For convincing both of us that emotional support was equivalent to financial contribution. Tyler, Rebecca said, what are you saying? I'm saying I need to move out, Tyler said. I need to get my own place, get a real job, start taking responsibility for my own life. But what about us? What about us? We can still be together. We can still support each other's dreams. But I need to support myself first, and I need to stop expecting you to subsidize my refusal to grow up. Rebecca looked between Tyler and me, her face a mixture of relief and loss, probably recognizing that this was the right decision while mourning the end of the fantasy they'd been living. When? She asked quietly. As soon as possible, Tyler said. I'll start looking for jobs tomorrow, apartments too. I'll be out by the end of the week. That's fast. It's 4 months too slow, Tyler said. I should have done this the first time. You had to ask your mother for money to cover expenses that should have been my responsibility. He looked around the apartment, probably seeing it clearly for the first time, seeing the damage and neglect that had accumulated during his residence. I'll pay to have the floors refinished, he said. And the walls repainted. It's my fault they're damaged. Tyler, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do. I need to take responsibility for the damage I've caused, both to the apartment and to your finances. With what money? With the money I'm going to earn at whatever job I can get as quickly as possible. Even if it's minimum wage, even if it's not my dream job, even if it means I can only stream as a hobby on weekends. He sat back down next to Rebecca, taking her hands in his for the first time since I'd arrived, and I could see something different in his posture, something that looked like maturity beginning to emerge. I love you, he said to her. But I've been loving you in a selfish way, in a way that put all the burden on you while I chased dreams that might never come true. That's not love, that's exploitation. I don't want you to give up everything. I'm not giving up everything. I'm giving up the right to expect someone else to pay for my choices. I'm giving up the right to live consequence-free while you deal with all the practical realities of adult life. What if we can make this work? What if I budget better, cut expenses? Rebecca, Tyler said gently, you shouldn't have to cut expenses to support my gaming habit. You should be able to afford groceries without worrying about energy drink costs. You should be able to pay rent without asking your mother for help. But what if your streaming really does take off someday? Then someday I'll be able to afford my own place and my own expenses. But until that day, I need to be a grown-up who takes care of himself. Rebecca nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face, but I could see something like relief beginning to replace the panic in her expression. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of being alone. Of not having you here. You won't be alone. You'll have yourself, which is something you've been neglecting while you took care of me. You'll have your friends, your family, your own life that doesn't revolve around supporting someone else's dreams. Tyler looked at me again, and I could see him struggling with something he needed to say. Mrs. Crawford, he said formally, I'm sorry for the way I've treated your daughter. I'm sorry for the way I've treated you. I'm sorry for being the kind of man who thought emotional support was equivalent to financial partnership. I appreciate that, I said. I'm going to do better, he said. Not just for Rebecca, but for myself. I'm going to become the kind of person who deserves the love and support she's been giving me. That's all anyone can ask, I said. He turned back to Rebecca, and I could see the conversation that was happening between them without words, the mutual recognition that this was the end of one phase of their relationship and potentially the beginning of a healthier one. I'll start packing tonight, Tyler said. I'll call some friends, see if someone has a couch I can crash on while I look for work in my own place. You don't have to leave tonight. I do, actually. I need to start taking responsibility for my own housing immediately. I need to stop depending on your generosity for basic necessities like a place to sleep. Tyler. It's okay, Rebecca. This is the right thing to do. For both of us. He stood up and headed toward the guest room, probably to begin the process of dismantling the gaming setup that had been more important than basic courtesy to his girlfriend's visiting mother. Rebecca sat on the couch, crying quietly, and I moved to sit beside her, offering the kind of comfort that only a mother could provide. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. For what? For letting my relationship fall apart? For having a relationship with someone who's capable of recognizing when he's wrong and willing to do something about it. That's actually pretty rare. Is it? Very rare. Most people double down when they're confronted with their mistakes. Tyler just demonstrated that he's capable of growth and change. That's someone worth keeping in your life, just maybe not someone worth financially supporting while he figures himself out. I'm going to miss him. I'm sure you will. But you're also going to rediscover what it feels like to live within your means, to make decisions based on what you want rather than what someone else needs. I don't even remember what I want anymore. You'll remember. It might take some time, but you'll remember what it feels like to have goals that don't involve sacrificing everything for someone else's dreams. From the guest room came the sounds of Tyler packing, the rustling of clothes and the careful wrapping of electronic equipment. He was apparently serious about leaving as quickly as possible, serious about starting the process of taking responsibility for his own life. Mom, Rebecca said quietly, thank you. For what? For asking the hard questions. For making me see what I'd been avoiding seeing. You would have figured it out eventually. Would I? Or would I have just kept making excuses, kept asking you for emergency money, kept telling myself that love was enough to solve financial problems? I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm glad we didn't have to find out. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to Tyler's packing, listening to the sound of a gaming setup being disassembled, listening to the beginning of a more honest relationship between two people who had finally stopped pretending that love could exist without respect, without contribution, without mutual support. By midnight, Tyler had packed everything he owned and called a friend who agreed to let him sleep on a couch across town. He loaded his gaming equipment and clothes into Rebecca's car, and she drove him to his temporary housing, probably their first real conversation as equals happening during that drive. When she came back an hour later, she found me sitting in the guest room, looking around at the space that had been completely transformed by Tyler's departure. The room was empty now except for the original furniture, the floors clearly visible. For the first time in months, the damage to the walls obvious without gaming equipment to hide it. "It looks so different," Rebecca said from the doorway. "It looks like a guest room again," I said. "Like a place where visiting mothers could sleep instead of couches." She laughed, a real laugh for the first time since I'd arrived, and came to sit beside me on the bed. "I'm sorry I made you sleep on the couch," she said. "I'm sorry I put Tyler's gaming setup ahead of your comfort. You were trying to keep everyone happy. I was trying to avoid making difficult decisions. There's a difference." "Yes, there is. But now you know the difference, and that's what matters." "What happens next?" she asked. "Next, you figure out what you want your life to look like when you're not supporting someone else's dreams. Next, you rediscover who you are when you're not worried about money all the time. Next, you decide whether Tyler has earned the right to be part of that life, and if so, how. Do you think he'll get his act together? I think he took the first step tonight. Whether he takes the second step and the third step and all the steps after that, that's up to him. And if he doesn't? Then you'll know who he really is. And you can make decisions based on reality instead of potential." "I love him," she said. "I know you do. But love without respect and contribution isn't sustainable. Tyler is learning that, and now you know it too." She nodded, leaning against my shoulder the way she used to when she was little and needed comfort after a difficult day. "Mom," she said, "I'm really glad you came to visit. Even though it turned your life upside down? Especially because it turned my life upside down. I needed someone to shake me awake, to make me see what I'd been avoiding seeing. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But this was better. This way, Tyler had the chance to do the right thing. Instead of me just kicking him out or letting resentment build until we hated each other. He's a good man who was making bad choices," I said. "Those are fixable problems." "Do you really think so?" "I think anyone who can recognize their mistakes and commit to changing them has a chance at becoming the person they want to be. Whether Tyler becomes that person remains to be seen. And me? Do I have a chance at becoming the person I want to be?" "You already are the person you want to be," I said. "You just forgot for a while because you were so busy taking care of someone else. But now you have the chance to remember." We sat in that empty guest room, mother and daughter, talking about the future for the first time in months without the conversation being filtered through Tyler's needs or dominated by financial stress. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I was talking to the Rebecca I'd raised, the strong, independent woman who had gotten lost somewhere along the way but was finally ready to find herself again. The morning after Tyler moved out, I woke up in the guest room for the first time since arriving in Seattle. The silence was extraordinary, not just the absence of gaming sounds but the deeper quiet that comes when tension leaves a space. Rebecca had insisted I take the proper bed, and lying there in the early dawn light, I could see the full extent of the damage Tyler's gaming setup had caused to the room I'd so carefully designed and furnished. The hardwood floors bore deep scratches where his gaming chair had been dragged across them repeatedly. Dark stains marked the walls where energy drinks had been spilled and never properly cleaned. The electrical outlets showed scorch marks from overloaded power strips, and the baseboards had gouges where equipment had been carelessly moved. Looking at the destruction, I felt a familiar mixture of anger and sadness, not just for the monetary cost of repairs but for what the damage represented about the kind of person my daughter had been trying to love. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Around 7 a.m., already dressed for work but moving more slowly than usual, like someone adjusting to the absence of familiar chaos. "How did you sleep?" she asked, though her own face showed she'd probably spent most of the night processing everything that had happened. "Much better," I said honestly. "Though I suspect you didn't sleep much." "Not really. It's weird how quiet the apartment is without Tyler's setup running all night." "Is that a good weird or a bad weird?" She considered this for a moment. Standing in the doorway of the room that had been her guest room until 4 months ago, probably seeing it clearly for the first time since Tyler had claimed it. "I think it's a good weird," she said finally. I'd forgotten what silence sounded like. I got up and walked around the room, taking more detailed photographs of the damage with my phone while Rebecca watched. She didn't ask why I was documenting everything, probably assuming I was just being thorough about assessing what needed to be repaired. This is going to be expensive to fix, she said quietly, running her fingers along one of the deeper scratches in the floor. Tyler said he'd pay for the repairs. With what money? He doesn't have a job yet. Then he'll have to get one quickly. And start making payments. Responsibility means following through on commitments, even when it's inconvenient. Rebecca nodded, probably thinking about all the commitments Tyler had made over the past 4 months and how few of them he'd actually kept. The promise to contribute to expenses once his streaming took off. The promise to be more mindful of noise levels after the first neighbor complaint. The promise to help with household chores that had somehow never materialized into actual assistance. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know? How did you see what I couldn't see about Tyler?" I set down my phone and gave her my full attention, recognizing this as one of those conversations that could shape how she approached relationships for the rest of her life. "Experience," I said simply. "I've been in real estate for over 20 years, and I've learned to spot people who make promises they can't keep, people who want all the benefits without any of the responsibilities. But this wasn't business. This was love. Love doesn't exempt people from basic standards of behavior. If anything, love should inspire people to be more responsible, more considerate, more committed to contributing rather than just consuming." I thought I was being supportive. "You were being supportive. The question is whether Tyler was worthy of that support, and whether your support was helping him grow or helping him avoid growing up." She sat down on the edge of the bed, still processing the magnitude of the changes that had happened in the span of a single evening. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of being alone. Of making the wrong decisions. Of Tyler not being able to change and losing him completely." "Those are all reasonable fears," I said. "But let me ask you this, what scares you more, being alone or being with someone who doesn't contribute to your life in meaningful ways?" "I don't know. Think about the past 4 months. Think about the stress, the financial pressure, the way you've been living. Does that feel like a life you want to continue?" "No," she said without hesitation. "I've been exhausted all the time. Worried about money constantly. Making excuses for behavior I knew was wrong." "Then you have your answer. But what if Tyler really does change? What if he gets a job and starts contributing and becomes the partner I know he could be? Then you'll have learned something valuable about setting boundaries and expecting accountability. And Tyler will have learned something valuable about what it takes to be worthy of someone's love and support. And if he doesn't change? Then you'll have learned something equally valuable about recognizing when someone isn't ready to be the partner you deserve." Rebecca nodded slowly, and I could see her beginning to understand that either outcome would be better than the limbo she'd been living in, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment that had characterized the past 4 months. "I need to get ready for work," she said, but she didn't move immediately. "Rebecca," I said, "there's something else we need to talk about." "What?" "The lease violation notice. That wasn't just a random building management decision." She looked at me with confusion, probably wondering how I could know anything about the building's management practices. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to reveal would change everything about how Rebecca understood her living situation, her relationship with me, and the consequences of the choices she'd been making. "I mean that I own this building, Rebecca. I'm your landlord." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge being built and burned simultaneously. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, confusion, understanding, and something that looked like horror as the implications became clear. "You own this building," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I bought it 2 years ago. It was one of my better investments, actually. Beautiful bones, great neighborhood, the kind of place where young professionals want to live." "You're my landlord?" "Technically, my property management company is your landlord. I try to keep some distance between my personal relationships and my business dealings." "But you knew I lived here when you bought it?" "No, actually. You applied for the apartment after I'd already purchased the building. When Janet showed me your application, I was as surprised as you would have been." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to have the experience of living independently, making your own housing choices, being responsible for your own lease obligations without feeling like your mother was watching over your shoulder." Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back, her mind clearly racing as she processed this information. "The lease violation notice," she said slowly. "You sent that?" "I instructed my property manager to send it, yes." "You were going to evict me?" "I was going to hold you accountable for the same lease terms that apply to every other tenant in my buildings. The unauthorized occupant, the property damage, the late rent payments, Those are all legitimate violations that would result in eviction proceedings for any tenant. But I'm your daughter. Which is exactly why you should be held to the same standards as everyone else. Maybe even higher standards. She stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between betrayal and understanding. How long have you known about Tyler living here? I've suspected for months. My property manager mentioned noise complaints and reports of an unauthorized male resident. I confirmed it when I arrived and saw the extent of his presence here. You could have said something earlier. I could have. But I wanted you to have the chance to handle the situation yourself, to recognize the problems and address them before they required legal intervention. And when I didn't? When you didn't, I had to choose between being your mother and being a responsible property owner. I chose to be both. Rebecca sat back down, her head in her hands, probably feeling overwhelmed by the realization that her housing crisis wasn't just a random misfortune but a direct consequence of choices she'd made under the watchful eye of someone who had every right to hold her accountable. I've been asking you for money to help with rent, she said, her voice muffled by her hands. Money to pay rent on a building you own. Yes. And you gave it to me. Yes. Why? Because you're my daughter, and I love you. But also because I hoped you'd figure out that the reason you needed help wasn't bad luck or economic hardship, but Tyler's presence in your life. I feel like an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're someone who was trying to make love work with someone who wasn't ready to be a real partner. That's not idiotic, it's human. But I should have seen it. I should have recognized what was happening. Maybe. But recognizing problems and knowing how to solve them are different skills. You're learning both. She looked up at me, and I could see her struggling with something she needed to understand. Mom, if you own this building, then you know exactly how much financial damage Tyler's presence has caused. I do. How much? I pulled out my phone and opened the file I'd been building since I arrived, the documentation of late fees, property damage estimates, and the additional wear and tear caused by unauthorized occupancy. The property damage will cost approximately $3,000 to repair properly, I said. The late fees that have been waived amount to about $800. The additional utilities usage caused by Tyler's gaming equipment and extended presence adds up to roughly $400 over 4 months. $4,000, Rebecca said quietly. Plus the money I've been sending you for emergencies, which totals another $4,000 over the past 8 months. $8,000. Tyler's presence in my life has cost $8,000 in less than a year. That's just the direct costs. It doesn't include the opportunity cost of not being able to save money, not being able to invest in your own future, not being able to enjoy the financial freedom you were earning with your salary. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, staring at the numbers on my phone screen as if they might change if she looked at them long enough. I could have had a real emergency fund with that money, she said finally. You could have had a lot of things. I could have taken that vacation to Europe I've been putting off. Yes. I could have started saving for a house down payment. Yes. Instead, I spent $8,000 supporting someone who couldn't be bothered to get a job or treat my visiting mother with basic courtesy. You spent $8,000 learning what kind of man Tyler really was, and what kind of woman you want to be. That's expensive education, but it's not worthless. Is it worth $8,000? That depends on what you do with what you've learned. She stood up again, walking to the window that overlooked the courtyard of the building I owned, the building where she'd been struggling to pay rent while I sent her money to cover the shortfall created by her freeloading boyfriend. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide what you want your life to look like going forward. Do you want to stay in this apartment, which you can easily afford on your own? Do you want to move somewhere else, start fresh? Do you want to give Tyler a chance to prove he can change, or do you want to focus on rebuilding your own financial stability? What about the lease violation notice? If Tyler is gone and the property damage gets repaired, then the violations have been remedied. The notice becomes a piece of paper documenting a problem that was identified and solved. And if Tyler doesn't follow through on paying for the repairs? Then he'll learn what consequences look like when promises aren't kept. How? Small claims court, if necessary. Garnished wages once he starts earning them. A lesson in what happens when you damage other people's property and refuse to take responsibility. Rebecca nodded, probably beginning to understand that accountability was something Tyler had been avoiding but would no longer be able to escape. Mom, she said, I need to ask you something else. What? When you were married to Dad, did you ever support him financially? Your father and I both worked, both contributed to household expenses. When one of us was between jobs or had reduced income, the other one picked up more of the load temporarily. But it was always temporary, and it was always reciprocal. Tyler's situation was supposed to be temporary too. But it wasn't reciprocal, was it? When you needed financial help, Tyler didn't step up and get a job to reduce the pressure on you. He just let you handle it while he continued gaming. No, it wasn't reciprocal at all. That's the difference between a partnership and parasitism, Rebecca. Partners share burdens and responsibilities. Parasites just consume resources while the host does all the work. She winced at the word parasite, but she didn't argue with the characterization. I enabled him, she said. Yes, you did. But enabling someone is different from being malicious or stupid. You enabled him because you loved him and wanted him to succeed. The question is whether that love and support helped him become a better person or helped him avoid becoming one. It helped him avoid becoming one. And now he has the opportunity to become one, if he chooses to take it. And if he doesn't? Then you'll know who he really is, and you can make decisions based on that knowledge instead of on hope and potential. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it briefly before showing me the screen. It was from Tyler, found a job interview for this afternoon. Wish me luck. He's moving fast, I observed. He always does when he's motivated. The question is whether he'll stay motivated once the immediate crisis passes. What do you think? I think last night scared him. I think he realized that his actions have real consequences for real people, and he doesn't like who that makes him. That's a good start. But it's just a start. The real test will be whether he can sustain that motivation when it means doing boring, difficult things like working a regular job and saving money to pay for property damage. Rebecca was learning to think like a woman who valued actions over words, results over promises, consistency over dramatic gestures. It was painful to watch her let go of romantic notions about love conquering all, but it was necessary for her to become the kind of person who could build a healthy relationship with someone worthy of her support. I need to go to work, she said, checking the time on her phone. Of course. Will you be home for dinner? I should be. Why? Because I thought we could celebrate. Celebrate what? Your freedom. Your financial recovery. Your willingness to choose yourself over someone who wasn't choosing you. She smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her since arriving in Seattle. That nice, she said. But let me pay for dinner this time. I want to see what it feels like to spend money on something I want instead of something Tyler needs. Deal. After Rebecca left for work, I spent the morning documenting the apartment more thoroughly, taking detailed photographs of every damaged surface, every stain, every mark that would need to be addressed before the space could be considered properly maintained. It was methodical work, the kind of property assessment I'd done hundreds of times over the years, but this time it felt personal in a way that went beyond the financial investment. This was my daughter's home, sounds the space where she'd been trying to build a life with someone who had treated it like a temporary gaming den. Every scratch on the floor, every stain on the wall, represented a moment when Tyler had prioritized his convenience over basic respect for the space Rebecca was providing him. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Janet, my property manager, calling with an update on the situation at the Meridian Apartments. Miss Crawford, she said, I wanted to let you know that we received a call this morning from the tenant in 3B. She wanted to report that the unauthorized occupant has moved out and that she's arranging for property damage repairs. That's good news. She also asked about the possibility of entering into a payment plan for the late fees that have been waived over the past few months. What did you tell her? I told her that would be possible, but that it would need to be approved by the property owner. Approve it. Standard terms, reasonable payments, full amount paid within 6 months. Of course. She seemed very relieved. I'm sure she was. Miss Crawford, if you don't mind me asking, this seems like an unusual level of personal attention for a single unit violation. Janet had been managing properties for me for 3 years and had handled dozens of lease violations, eviction proceedings, and tenant disputes. She was probably curious about why I was taking such direct involvement in what should have been a routine enforcement action. Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing this situation resolved properly, I said. Understood. Is there anything else you need me to handle? Actually, yes. I want you to prepare a lease renewal offer for 3B. Standard terms, but I want to include a provision about unauthorized occupants that's very clear about the consequences of future violations. More specific than our standard language. Much more specific. I want it to be crystal clear that any unauthorized long-term occupancy will result in immediate eviction proceedings, no warnings, no second chances. I'll draft something and send it to you for approval. Thank you, Janet. After hanging up, I continued my documentation of the apartment, but my mind was on Rebecca and the choices she would need to make in the coming weeks and months. Tyler's departure was just the first step in what would need to be a complete reevaluation of how she approached relationships, money, and personal boundaries. The lease renewal with stronger language about unauthorized occupants wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about giving Rebecca a tool for setting clear boundaries in future relationships, a legal framework that would prevent her from gradually sliding into another arrangement where she carried all the financial responsibility while someone else pursued their dreams at her expense. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with another text from Tyler. Got the job. Start Monday. We'll stop by this weekend to begin arrangements for repair payments. I showed the message to Rebecca when she called. During her lunch break. He sounds serious, she said. Actions will tell us more than words. I know. But it's encouraging that he's moving so quickly. It is encouraging. The question is whether he can sustain this energy once the novelty wears off and he's dealing with the daily reality of working to pay for his mistakes. What do you think will happen? I think Tyler is going to discover what most adults know, that taking responsibility for your actions is harder than making promises to do better. But it's the only way to become someone worthy of real respect. And if he can't handle it, then you'll have learned something important about his character, and you'll be in a much better position to make decisions about your future. I'm nervous about this weekend. Why? Because I don't know what our relationship looks like now. Before, I was the responsible one and he was the dreamer. Now we both have to be responsible, and I don't know if we'll still fit together. That's a very mature concern. Is it? It means you're thinking about compatibility beyond just emotional attraction. You're considering whether Tyler can become the kind of partner who contributes rather than just consumes. What if he can't? Then you'll be sad for a while, but you'll also be free to find someone who doesn't require you to sacrifice your financial security for their emotional support. I don't even know what that would look like. It would look like being with someone who wants to build a life with you, not just live in the life you've built for yourself. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, probably contemplating a future where her partner's goals aligned with her own instead of competing with them for resources and attention. Mom, she said finally, thank you for not just bailing me out. What do you mean? I mean, you could have just paid Tyler's expenses directly, covered his rent somewhere else, made the problem go away without him having to face any consequences. I could have. But that wouldn't have helped either of you learn anything important. It would have been easier. Easier isn't always better. Sometimes people need to experience the natural consequences of their choices in order to grow. Even when it's painful? Especially when it's painful. Pain is often what motivates people to change behaviors that aren't working. Tyler is definitely experiencing pain right now. Good. Pain means he's taking the situation seriously, means he understands that his choices have affected real people in real ways. I'm experiencing pain too. Also good. Pain means you're recognizing that the situation you were in wasn't sustainable, wasn't healthy, wasn't the kind of relationship you want to accept going forward. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for 4 months. You were trying to make something work that fundamentally wasn't working. That takes a lot of energy and requires a lot of denial. Now you can wake up and see the situation clearly. It's terrifying and relieving at the same time. That's exactly what clarity feels like when you've been living in confusion for a long time. When Rebecca came home from work that evening, she found me in the kitchen preparing dinner with groceries I'd bought myself, ingredients for a meal that didn't include any of Tyler's dietary preferences or restrictions. It smells amazing in here, she said, dropping her purse by the door and kicking off her heels with obvious relief. Chicken marsala, I said. With real mushrooms, not the canned ones Tyler preferred. I'd forgotten how much I love mushrooms. You've been accommodating someone else's tastes for so long that you forgot your own. She sat down at the kitchen table, watching me cook in her kitchen, probably noticing how different the space felt without Tyler's presence dominating it. This is weird, she said. What's weird? Being able to cook what I want, eat what I want, make plans without considering Tyler's streaming schedule. Does it feel good or bad? It feels spacious. Like the apartment got bigger overnight. Relationships should make your life feel bigger, not smaller. Tyler made my life smaller without me realizing it. How? I stopped seeing friends because I couldn't afford to go out. I stopped pursuing hobbies because I didn't have money for supplies. I stopped making plans because I never knew what Tyler's tournament schedule would be. And now? Now I can do whatever I want with my free time and my disposable income. What do you want to do? I want to have dinner with my mom without worrying about whether there will be enough food for 3 people. I want to go to bed tonight without hearing gaming sounds through the wall. I want to wake up tomorrow and make plans based on what I want to do instead of what Tyler needs me to accommodate. Those are good wants. Are they selfish? They're healthy. There's a difference between being selfish and having a self to care for. Rebecca nodded, probably beginning to remember what it felt like to have preferences that mattered, opinions that counted, a life that belonged to her instead of being organized around someone else's demands. Tyler texted me, she said. About the job? About that, and about wanting to talk this weekend about our relationship. How do you feel about that? Nervous. Hopeful. Scared that he'll convince me to let him move back in before he's actually changed anything meaningful. What would convince you to let him move back in? I don't know. Maybe if he had been working for several months, if he had saved enough money to pay me back for all the expenses I covered, if he had demonstrated that he could support himself without my help. Those are reasonable standards. They feel impossible right now. They feel impossible because Tyler has never met them before. But impossible and unprecedented aren't the same thing. What if he gets frustrated and gives up? Then you'll know he wasn't serious about changing, and you'll be able to make decisions based on that knowledge. What if he succeeds but our relationship still doesn't work? Then you'll know that sometimes people can grow in different directions, and that's okay too. I'm not sure I'm ready for any of these conversations. You don't have to be ready. You just have to be honest about what you want and what you're willing to accept. What if I don't know what I want? Then you take time to figure it out. You don't have to make any permanent decisions about Tyler this weekend, or this month, or even this year. Really? Really? You can take all the time you need to see whether Tyler's changes are genuine and sustainable, whether they result in the kind of partnership you actually want. That feels like a lot of pressure. It's not pressure, it's freedom. The freedom to make choices based on evidence rather than hope, based on reality rather than potential. We ate dinner together, mother and daughter, in the quiet apartment. That had finally become peaceful. Rebecca told me about her work, her colleagues, her goals for her career, all the things that had been overshadowed by Tyler-related stress for the past 4 months. I listened to my daughter remember who she was when she wasn't worried about money or trying to keep someone else happy, and I felt proud of the woman she was becoming. After dinner, we settled in the living room with wine and continued talking. About the future, about the kind of life Rebecca wanted to build for herself, about the standards she wanted to set for any relationship going forward. I think I want to be single for a while, she said eventually. How long is a while? Long enough to remember what my own goals are. Long enough to build up my savings again. Long enough to feel confident that I can support myself without needing emergency help from my mother. Those are good goals. What if Tyler wants to get back together before I'm ready? Then he'll learn about waiting, about respecting someone else's timeline instead of expecting them to accommodate his. What if he doesn't want to wait? Then he'll learn that real love involves patience, and if he's not capable of patience, then he's not ready for real love. It's going to be hard. Yes, it is. But hard doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes the hardest things are the most important things. Did you know it would work out this way when you came to visit? I hoped it would work out with Tyler recognizing his mistakes and choosing to change. I'm proud of him for making that choice, even if it took a crisis to motivate it. Are you proud of me? I'm proud of you for being willing to see the truth about your situation, even when it was painful. I'm proud of you for choosing yourself when it would have been easier to keep making excuses. I almost didn't choose myself. But you did, in the end. That's what matters. What happens when you go back to Phoenix? You continue building the life you want, with or without Tyler. You make decisions based on what's good for you, not what's convenient for someone else. Will you keep helping me if I need it? I'll keep being your mother, which means I'll help you when you truly need help, but I won't enable you to make choices that aren't in your best interest. How will you know the difference? I'll ask questions. I'll expect honesty. I'll trust you to tell me the truth about your situation instead of just the version that makes you feel better. That sounds fair. It sounds like the kind of relationship adults have with each other, based on mutual respect and honest communication. I want that kind of relationship with you. You have it, starting now. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of the changes that had happened in just a few days. Rebecca had reclaimed her apartment, her financial freedom, and her sense of self. Tyler had been forced to confront the reality of his choices and take responsibility for changing them. And I had learned that sometimes the best way to help someone you love is to hold them accountable for the choices they make, even when it's painful for everyone involved. Mom, Rebecca said as we prepared to go to bed, I'm really glad you came to visit. Even though it turned your life upside down? Especially because it turned my life upside down. I needed someone to shake me awake, to help me see what I'd been refusing to see. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But this was better. This way, Tyler had the chance to choose responsibility instead of just having it forced on him. This way, I had the chance to choose myself instead of just being abandoned. And this way, you both learned what you're capable of when you're motivated to change. Do you think Tyler will really change? I think Tyler surprised himself tonight by choosing accountability over excuses. Whether he can sustain that choice remains to be seen. And me? Do you think I'll be able to sustain choosing myself? I think you've already started. The hardest part was recognizing that you needed to make different choices. Everything else is just following through. I hope you're right. I hope so too. But even if you struggle sometimes, even if you make mistakes, you'll know what healthy looks like now. You'll have a standard to measure future relationships against. Thank you for giving me that standard. Thank you for being willing to accept it. We hugged goodnight, and I watched my daughter walk to her bedroom in the apartment she could afford on her own, in the building I owned, in the life she was finally ready to claim as her own. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations with Tyler, hard choices about the future. But tonight, Rebecca was free to make those choices from a position of strength rather than desperation, clarity rather than confusion. And that, I thought as I settled into the guest room that was finally being used for its intended purpose, was worth every uncomfortable night I'd spent on the couch, every difficult conversation I'd forced, every moment of watching my daughter struggle to find the courage to choose herself over someone who hadn't earned the sacrifice she was making. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the refusal to enable their worst choices. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is force them to face the consequences of their actions. And sometimes the most loving response to someone's crisis is to let them experience enough discomfort to motivate real change. Tyler would sink or swim based on his own efforts now. Rebecca would build her future based on her own choices and priorities. And I would return to Phoenix knowing that my daughter had learned the difference between love and enabling, between support and sacrifice, between partnership and parasitism. The rest, as they say, was up to them. 6 months later, I received a package in the mail at my Phoenix office. Inside was a cashier's check for $3,000, along with a handwritten letter on simple notebook paper. Tyler's handwriting was careful, deliberate, like someone who had taken time to think about every word. Mrs. Crawford, it began, this is the final payment for the property damage I caused to your building. I know it took longer than it should have, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix what I broke, but I needed you to know that I kept my promise. I've been working construction for 6 months now, saving every extra dollar to pay this debt. It taught me what real work feels like, what earning money actually means when you have to show up every day whether you feel like it or not. The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing Tyler's transformation from aspiring gamer to responsible adult. He'd kept the construction job even after discovering he was good at it, even after his supervisor offered him additional training that could lead to better pay. He'd moved into a studio apartment that he could afford on his own. He'd sold most of his gaming equipment to help cover the repair costs more quickly. Rebecca and I have been talking, he wrote. Not about getting back together, but about becoming friends who respect each other. She's doing amazing on her own. She bought a car without asking anyone for help. She's taking photography classes because she always wanted to learn but never had the money before. She seems happier than I ever saw her when we were together, and that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of boyfriend I was. The most striking part of the letter was his reflection on accountability. I used to think that loving someone meant they should support your dreams no matter what. Now I understand that loving someone means making sure your dreams don't become their burden. Real love makes both people stronger, not just one person comfortable while the other person struggles. He ended with gratitude rather than requests. Thank you for teaching me that actions have consequences, even when the people who love you try to protect you from them. Thank you for showing me what it looks like when someone holds you accountable because they believe you can do better, not because they want to punish you. I'm a better man now because you refused to let me stay a boy. I called Rebecca that evening to tell her about the payment and the letter. Her voice was bright, energetic in a way I hadn't heard since she was in college and excited about her future. He's really changed, she said. Not just the job and the money, but his whole attitude about responsibility. When we have coffee now, he talks about his work projects, his goals for learning new skills, his plans for saving money. It's like he discovered who he actually is when he's not hiding behind excuses. How do you feel about that? Proud of him. And grateful that we both learned these lessons before it was too late to recover from them. Any regrets about ending the relationship? None. We're better as friends who respect each other than we ever were as partners where I was carrying all the weight. And now I know what to look for in future relationships. Which is someone who adds to my life instead of subtracting from it. Someone who wants to build something with me, not just live in what I've built for myself. Rebecca had indeed transformed her life in Tyler's absence. She'd paid off the credit card debt that had accumulated during his residency. She'd built Up a real emergency fund. She'd started pursuing interests that had been abandoned when all her spare money went to supporting Tyler's lifestyle. Most importantly, she'd learned to value her own goals and preferences instead of automatically deferring to someone else's needs. "I'm dating someone new," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Tell me about him." "His name is Marcus. He's an accountant, which sounds boring, but he's actually really funny and thoughtful. The first time we went out for dinner, he insisted on paying for his own meal because he said he didn't want me to feel obligated to see him again just because he'd bought me a sandwich. That's refreshing. Right?" And when I mentioned that I was taking photography classes, he asked if he could see some of my work. Not because he wanted to critique it or suggest improvements, but because he was genuinely interested in something that made me happy. He sounds like someone who understands that relationships should be partnerships. He does. And when I told him about Tyler, about how I'd enabled someone for months while sacrificing my own financial stability, he didn't judge me or act like I was naive. He just said he was impressed that I'd learned to prioritize my own well-being. Smart man. Very smart. And Mom, he has his own apartment, his own car, his own savings account. I don't have to worry about whether he can support himself because he's already doing it. How does that feel? Like freedom. Like I can choose to be with him because I want to, not because he needs me to take care of him. This was the lesson I'd hoped Rebecca would learn, though I'd never imagined it would require such dramatic intervention to teach it. The difference between being wanted and being needed, between partnership and caretaking, between love that strengthened both people and love that depleted one person for the benefit of another. A year after my visit to Seattle, Rebecca called. With news that surprised me even though it shouldn't have. "I'm buying a house," she announced. "In Seattle? 20 minutes outside the city. It's a little craftsman cottage that needs some work, but I've saved enough for a down payment and I qualified for the loan on my own. I'm so proud of you. I wanted to ask if you'd come help me move in. Not financially," she added quickly. "I mean physically help. Carry boxes, hang pictures, maybe give me some decorating advice." "I'd love to. And Mom? I want to pay market rate for your advice. You're a professional, and I want to hire you properly for a consultation about the property." This was growth I hadn't expected but should have anticipated. Rebecca had learned not just to be financially independent, but to value expertise. Appropriately, to understand that even family relationships worked better when everyone contributed fairly. "What about Marcus? Is he part of this house purchase?" "He's excited for me, but no, this is my house. My investment in my own future. If we decide to move in together someday, we'll make that decision based on what we both want, not because either of us can't afford to live independently." That's very wise. I learned from the best teacher, even if the lessons were sometimes painful. The move-in weekend was everything I'd hoped for when I first planned to visit Rebecca. We worked together as adults, making decisions collaboratively, sharing tasks based on ability rather than obligation. Marcus joined us for the heavy lifting, proving himself to be exactly the kind of man who contributed without being asked, who showed up because he wanted to help rather than because he expected to be taken care of. Tyler stopped by briefly to deliver a housewarming gift, a small succulent in a handmade wooden planter he'd crafted himself. His appearance was dramatically different from the pajama-wearing gamer I'd met on my couch. He was clean-shaven, wearing work clothes that were dusty but well-maintained, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who earned his own way in the world. "Congratulations on the house," he told Rebecca sincerely. "You deserve every good thing that comes your way." "Thank you. And thank you for this," she said, examining the planter. "Did you make this yourself?" "Been learning woodworking in my spare time. Turns out I'm pretty good with my hands when I'm not spending 12 hours a day holding a game controller." It was a brief interaction, friendly but without the undercurrent of obligation or resentment that often characterized relationships between exes. They had both grown beyond the people they'd been during their unhealthy dynamic, and that growth allowed them to appreciate each other without trying to recapture something that had never really worked. After Tyler left, Marcus helped me hang pictures while Rebecca unpacked kitchen boxes. Watching them work together, I saw the difference between Tyler's relationship with Rebecca and this new partnership. Marcus anticipated Rebecca's needs without being asked, offered suggestions without insisting on his preferences, contributed labor and expertise without expecting gratitude or recognition. "This is what healthy looks like," Rebecca said quietly to me as we arranged books on built-in shelves. "Yes, it is." Tyler was practice. Learning what I wouldn't accept, learning what I was worth, learning that love shouldn't cost me everything I'd worked to build. And now you know. Now I know. And because I know, I can choose Marcus from a position of strength rather than need, confidence rather than desperation. That evening, after Marcus had gone home to his own apartment and Rebecca and I were Settling into her new living room with wine and takeout, she asked me the question I'd been expecting. Mom, do you think you were too hard on Tyler back then? Do you? I think you were exactly as hard as the situation required. If you'd been gentler, if you'd just given him more money or paid his expenses directly, he never would have been forced to grow up. And if I'd been harsher? If you'd just kicked him out without giving him the chance to choose accountability, he might have learned that consequences were something that happened to him rather than something he created for himself. So you think the approach was right? I think you loved both of us enough to let us experience the discomfort necessary for real change. That's not easy love, but it's effective love. It wasn't easy to watch. I'm sure it wasn't. But easy isn't always better. Sometimes people need to feel the full weight of their choices in order to make different ones. Do you think Tyler would have changed if the consequences had been different? Maybe eventually. But it might have taken years instead of months. And it might have cost you much more than $8,000 and a few uncomfortable nights on a couch. Rebecca nodded, understanding that the intervention I'd orchestrated had been surgical in its precision, designed to create maximum motivation for change with minimum long-term damage to anyone involved. I have something to tell you, she said. What? I've been sending money to a financial literacy program for young adults. Anonymous donations, but substantial ones. Enough to fund workshops about recognizing financial manipulation in relationships, setting boundaries around money, understanding the difference between support and enabling. That's wonderful. It's my way of paying forward what you taught me. My way of helping other people avoid the mistakes I made or recognize them faster than I did. You're helping people learn lessons they might otherwise have to learn the hard way. Exactly. Because not everyone has a mother who owns the building they live in and can orchestrate the perfect learning experience. We laughed about that, about the almost absurd coincidence that had allowed me to teach Rebecca these lessons from a position of complete authority over her housing situation. What are the odds? Rebecca said. That I would choose to live in a building my mother owned, that I would bring Tyler into that space, that you would witness the whole situation firsthand? Maybe it wasn't coincidence, I said. Maybe it was opportunity. The universe giving us a chance to address problems that needed addressing, to teach lessons that needed teaching. Do you really believe that? I believe that when we're ready to learn, teachers appear. Sometimes in the form of crisis, sometimes in the form of consequences, sometimes in the form of mothers who refuse to enable behavior that isn't serving anyone. You were a good teacher. You were a good student, even when the lessons were painful. And Tyler was a good student too, eventually. Eventually. That's the key word. Some people need more pressure than others to motivate change. As I prepared to return to Phoenix the next morning, Rebecca walked me to the rental car with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. She was living in a house she'd bought herself, dating a man who contributed equally to their relationship, pursuing interests she'd abandoned during her enabling phase. I love you, Mom, she said as we hugged goodbye. I love you too. Thank you for not rescuing me when what I really needed was to rescue myself. Thank you for being strong enough to do the work once you understood what needed to be done. Will you come visit again? Of course. But next time, I'll be sleeping in a real guest room, and I won't have to document property damage caused by unauthorized occupants. Next time, you'll be visiting your daughter who knows the difference between love and exploitation, partnership and parasitism. That's all I ever wanted for you. Driving to the airport, I reflected on the year that had passed since my uncomfortable visit to Seattle. Rebecca had learned to value herself appropriately, to expect reciprocity in relationships, to distinguish between supporting someone's dreams and subsidizing their refusal to grow up. Tyler had learned that accountability was the price of respect, that real love required contribution rather than just consumption. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to protect them from the consequences of their choices. The story could have ended differently. Tyler could have refused to change, could have blamed Rebecca and me for his problems, could have continued the cycle of taking without giving. Rebecca could have chosen to continue enabling him, could have resented my intervention, could have learned nothing from the crisis except that her mother was controlling and judgmental. But they had both chosen growth over comfort, accountability over excuses, reality over fantasy. They had both discovered who they could become when they stopped hiding behind the roles that weren't serving them. As my plane lifted off from Seattle, I looked down at the city where my daughter was building a life based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Tyler was somewhere down there too, working construction and learning woodworking, dating someone new who appreciated his transformation without having lived through his previous dysfunction. Both of them were better people than they had been a year ago, not because I had rescued them from their problems, but because I had refused to rescue them from the opportunity to solve those problems themselves. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they're capable of more than they've been showing. Sometimes the most effective way to help someone is to stop helping them in ways that prevent them from helping themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, refusing to enable someone you love will motivate them to become someone worthy of the love you've been giving them all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.